So in our first three parts, we talked about how the Old Town triad of the Hightowers, the Maesters, and the Septons influenced Targaryen succession, started the dance with the dragons, and killed the dragons. And they did this through indirect, sneaky means because a prophecy told them that they could never raise arms against the Targaryens. If they did, the Citadel, the Starry Sept, and the High Tower would all be destroyed. Now you may be saying, isn't this a little extreme? This supposed Hightower conspiracy has killed thousands, and the Hightowers themselves lost several family members in the dance. Well, Grandmaster Pycelle has a story about Quentyn Hightower which sheds some light on the nature of House Hightower.
I was a boy in Old Town when the Grey Plague took half the city and 3/4 of the Citadel. Lord Hightower burned every ship in port, closed the gates, and commanded his guards to slay all those who tried to flee, be they men, women, or babes. They dragged him from his horse and slit his throat, and his young sons. But Quentyn Hightower did what was needed.
So it seems the Hightowers are the type to sacrifice themselves and people around them for the greater good. And the Citadel respects that. Marwyn even tells Sam that talking about the greater good will help him fit in at the Citadel and stay safe. Now we've gone over how the Old Town Triad has eliminated the dragons, which brings us to step 2, eliminating the Targaryens. Now this is mostly apparent in Rickard Stark's Southron Ambitions, but it goes a bit further as well. Lady Dustin tells us that a maester named Walys had power and influence over Eddard's dad, Rickard. She also tells us his mother was a Hightower and his father was an Archmaester of the Citadel at the center of the conspiracy. But which Archmaester could it be? Now if there were a Maester conspiracy, one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, is to control communication. Now the Maester that controls the Ravens is named Walgrave. Now Pate tells us that Walgrave knows a massive amount about Ravencraft. I'm not sure what there is to know about the science. I mean, even Chet in the Night's Watch was able to manage ravens. Perhaps it has to do with white ravens, or the speech of ravens, or secret messages, or getting ravens to go to more than one location. Whatever the case, it takes a lifetime to learn. Walgrave was the expert on ravens, so it's likely that he was at the center of the conspiracy. And based on the similarities in names with Walys, it's likely that Walgrave was Walys' father. Now Walgrave is now senile and often thinks Pate is Cressen, which means Cressen was probably good friends with Walgrave. So the two people most associated with the man in charge of communication at the Citadel are Walys and Cressen, who were the Maesters at Winterfell and Storm's End. Now of course Ned and Robert were at Winterfell and Storm's End, and their fostering in the Vale formed a deep friendship with each other and Jon Arryn. And as we all know, the Stark-Baratheon Arryn alliance is the base of Robert's rebellion. Now this fostering happened in the year 271 or thereabouts, and we don't really know why it happened. Fosterings are usually done to strengthen relations. But why strengthen relations? Trade? War? And whose idea was it? I'm guessing Walys and Cressen. In A Clash of Kings, Cressen gives Stannis 3 pieces of advice. Team up with his brother Renly, team up with Robb Stark, and team up with Lysa Arryn. Why not Greyjoys? Why not Dornish? Why not the Free Cities? He pushes Stark-Baratheon Arryn. Meanwhile, off in the south, House Hightower marries their daughter Aleri to Mace Tyrell. And in 273, Elia and Oberyn Martell visit Old Town. Elia Martell and Baelor Hightower are nearly married, except for Oberyn sabotages the whole thing by making fun of Baelor. Elia and Oberyn then head to Casterly Rock, where the Princess of Dorne tries to marry Oberyn to Cersei. Now Tywin refuses because he thinks he's going to get Cersei married to Rhaegar, and so the Princess of Dorne tries a different combination. How about Elia and Jaime? For some reason Jaime is off the table. Why Jaime is not available is not explained, but we do find out later that Hoster Tully and Tywin Lannister were planning on having Lysa Tully married to Jaime. Was the plan to marry Lysa to Jaime already in place when the Dornish visited? Hoster Tully definitely had ambitions outside of the Riverlands, as in 276 he betrothed Catelyn to Brandon Stark. Now Lady Dustin tells us that this was Maester Walys' idea, that he planted the idea in Rickard Stark's head, but we don't know who's been planting ideas in Hoster Tully's head. Now Maester Vyman is the current Maester of Riverrun, but he wasn't the Maester back then. Littlefinger tells us that that Maester is dead. It's possible that the Maester was Luwin. Catelyn says that Luwin was there at all of her births, and Robb was born at Riverrun. Whatever the case, around 280, Lyanna is betrothed to Robert. This is also probably Maester Walys' idea. So in the 270s, we actually almost had a full Seven Kingdom alliance. You see, Mace Tyrell married Aleri Hightower, and Baelor Hightower almost married Elia Martell, and Oberyn Martell almost married Cersei Lannister, and Jaime Lannister almost married Lysa Tully, and Catelyn Tully almost married Brandon Stark, and Lyanna Stark almost married Robert Baratheon. With Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark fostered in the Vale, we would have had a full Seven Kingdom alliance without the Targaryens. Now I'd like to point out that it's rather unusual for lords to marry outside of their own kingdom. Lords usually marry their own bannermen, and it's pretty much unheard of for the High Lords to marry each other. For example, here's the Lannister marriages of the past 100 years. Other than a Weber from the Reach, the Lord of Casterly Rock always married a Wester woman. And here are the Stark marriages before Eddard going back 200 years. There's a couple Blackwoods and a Royce, but generally the Lord of Winterfell marries a North woman. So the fact that the Starks, the Tullys, the Martells, the Lannisters, and the Baratheons are all shopping around for high-level marriages at around the same time is beyond fishy. Maybe Aerys wasn't paranoid. Maybe everyone was out to get him. Maybe the Hightowers knew that a few marriages would set him off. Now we can see that the real problem with the full Seven Kingdom alliance were the Martells and the Lannisters, which I suppose is understandable. The Hightowers were working one end of the chain, and the Maesters were working the other end of the chain, and the middle was neglected. The Hightowers and the Maesters also underestimated Oberyn Martell. Now you may remember that I made a little video called the Dornish Master Plan, in which I go into a lot of detail on Oberyn Martell. Now one of the most important points that I make in that video was Oberyn was scheming before Elia died. The guy was making alliances, training, and studying his ass off. But why? Now the existence of Obara Sand tells us that Oberyn was hanging in Old Town brothels around the year 270, and we also know that Marwyn hangs in Old Town brothels. Did they meet? I think they did. A 12-year-old Dornish prince would not go unnoticed at a brothel. And if Marwyn knew about the Hightower Maester conspiracy back in 270, Oberyn is just the type of impressionable youth that Marwyn would want to recruit for his plans, whatever those plans may be. So if Oberyn is working with Marwyn and has been since 270, his sabotage of Elia and Baelor Hightower's marriage is completely understandable. Oberyn's training and alliance forming is also understandable. He knows the Hightowers are trying to take over, and he wants to stop them. It also explains the attitude of Obara Sand. Obara hates Old Town for some reason, and thinks attacking it will avenge her father. Let me avenge my father. Let her ride the King's Road, whilst I turn the Marcher Lords out of their castles and hook around to march on Old Town. And how could you hope to hold Old Town? It will be enough to sack it. The wealth of Hightower. Is it gold you want? It is blood I want. Since the Hightower has been largely absent from the entire story, it seems Obara must know about the Hightower conspiracy in order to hold such a grudge. Now the Hightower-Martell marriage isn't the only one to fall apart. The Lannister marriages also go down in flames. Now Tywin screws up the alliance with the Dornish all by himself, but something very weird screws up the alliance between the Lannisters and the Tullys. Jaime takes the White to be close to Cersei because he's in love with her. Now we often take Jaime and Cersei's relationship for granted, but being attracted to your sibling is very unusual. Additionally, they were lusting after each other at age 8. It seems quite likely that sorcery was the cause of their prepubescent sibling lust. In fact, Maggie the Frog of Lannisport is specifically said to have the ability to make people fall in love. And Jaime and Cersei fall out of love pretty quickly and mysteriously as well. The two have been banging uncontrollably since age 8, and then suddenly hate each other after running into Qyburn. Were Cersei and Jaime made to fall in love to throw a wrench in the Hightower's plans? Was that spell removed to facilitate the Dornish master plan? Qyburn's manipulation of Cersei probably wouldn't have been possible if Jaime were still lingering around. Now the Maesters are only able to get the chain of alliances to 4 houses, and rather than suspecting the Hightowers, Aerys starts suspecting his own son. Now it's interesting that these suspicions come in the year of the false spring, essentially a spring in which white ravens flew that shouldn't have flown. Were the Maesters sending extra messages? Now Aerys' suspicions of his son come mainly from Varys, a man who probably wants a different Targaryen line on the throne. But it's important to note that Aerys' small council also contains Maester Pycelle and Gerald Hightower. Targaryen on Targaryen hatred caused by a Hightower, a Grand Maester, and a man whose name rhymes with Aerys. I think we've seen this before. Whatever the case, this small council is a recipe for war, and we'll wrap this all up in part 5.